Waheguru Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ki Fateh. I'm Ashminda Kaur, and I'd like to welcome you to the first all-women's panel of the Sikh Think Tank series. On our panel today are three exceptional professional Sikh women, and I'm delighted to welcome Parminder Kaur Veer, OBE, an award-winning film and television producer, international speaker, business consultant, who has worked for the BBC, ITV and Channel 4, amongst other major channels. She's the founder of PVL Media Consultants. In 2002, Parminder Kaur Veer was awarded an OBE for her services to the broadcasting and film in the United Kingdom. She's a board director of the UK Film Council and is a non-executive director of the Department for Culture, Media and Sports. Also on the panel is Parmjeet Kaur Matharu, managing director of leading global investment bank JP Morgan, with global tax responsibility spanning approximately 70 countries. Parmjeet is the chair of the VAT Working Group at the British Bankers Association and has a seat at the European Banking Federation and the European Fund and Asset Managers Association. She works with the OECD Tax Committee and Far Eastern trade bodies on tax-related policies and is the only Sikh representative in global indirect tax forums at this level of seniority. Parmjeet is also an executive with the Sikh Council UK and has led negotiations for the rights of Sikhs with the European ministers. And finally, we have Dr. Jeet Kaur, a medical doctor and Oxford graduate, who works with a leading pharmaceutical company where she specializes in developing treatments for diseases affecting the immune system. Welcome to my panel. So Parmjeet, let's start with you first. You have had an absolutely phenomenal career, and you've been involved in films such as Wuthering Heights, The Iron Lady, and Now Is Good, which I'm sure a lot of our audience have seen. And I just wanted to ask you, what got you started in media, and how did your career progress? Because it's quite an achievement to get where you are today.
Thank you. I mean, I would say I've had a very unconventional career, and why I moved into how I got into film and television is it was really a passion for telling stories. I was passionate about telling stories which have reflected me both on television, in the radio, in print, and in cinema. I came here in the 60s. I came to England in 1965 as a 10-year-old, as an immigrant. And there was very little of our stories, our realities that was reflected. And that remains still a passion, that if you want to work in television, you have to have a passion. If you want to work in the media, and my passion was telling stories. There are those who've got passion to be technicians, editors, cinematographers, directors, writers. My passion was finding a way of telling stories.
So all the stories that you've told so far, which story stands out in your mind for you?
Gosh, many. I mean, I started my career as a researcher in the BBC, making small items from 10 minutes, 15 minutes. My first film I ever produced was, as an independent, was a dance drama set in the London Underground. I guess out of all of those, the films that combine social activism, art and culture. So I made a lot of documentaries around what was then called the Third World, Africa, Asia, Latin America. Films on the enforced sterilization of women in India, Algeria, women at war.
So you also co-founded the Cultural Diversity Network, which is an alliance of UK broadcasters that work to create greater diversity in UK film. So how would you see the opportunities for Sikhs wanting a media career now versus when you started?
Well, I think how that was way back in 1996. I looked around at British television and I thought, gosh, if an alien landed in London and walked around London, they would see one London, a multicultural, culturally diverse London, incredibly vibrant, multilingual, and every nation of the world represented here. And yet when that alien would go home and turn on the television, there would be ethnic cleansing, and there was very clearly a complete lack of representation of Black and Asian talent on the screen. When they did appear, it would be in some stereotypical role. In the soaps, they would be cast as criminals, or the Asians would be cast as corner shop owners. And I have deep respect for those people who run corner shops. But the Asians in the UK also run other things. We run the National Health Service, we run the banks, We are across the public and the private sector, And that just was not reflected. Why? Because television only thought that it should cast black and Asian actors in race roles, and not because they can act or that they can produce or that they can direct mainstream general programming. So the Cultural Diversity Network really came out of, led from Carlton Television, which is a commercial channel, and it had both a moral reason for doing it and also, for me, a business reason. You cannot ignore the wealth that the Asian community and the Sikh community in particular contributes and generates to the GDP of this country. And it was the business case that one was making as well as a cultural case. Things did improve? Are things continuing to improve? I was at a launch of Meera Sayal's Asian Comedy Night at BBC Radio, and it was interesting hearing her say something, and she said it in a joking manner, which is, where is the ethnic representation or reflection in Downton Abbey, in some of the more popular television dramas that we're seeing, yeah? So I think, the issue still remains. The challenges of getting more and more Asians on screen, I don't think that challenge has been met completely.
And do you think that's because there's not enough people who are trying to get into this field, or do you think they're just blocked at certain levels, or they're pushed into particular stereotypes and it becomes very difficult for them to break out?
No, I also think, for me now, 1996, I thought it was really important to take on the establishment, the BBC, the ITV, Channel 4s, Sky, and get them to really change, both from behind the screen and in front of the screen. 2012, when really, where is the demand for content, and where is the surgence of creativity and innovation? It's in India, it's in Brazil, it's in Mexico, it's in China. So for me, if you are a camera person, you're a cinematographer, you're a sound recordist, you are working in any aspect of the industry, you're in business, you're in finance aspect of the industry, you should not limit yourself to the UK. The industry is a global industry, and it's an industry that allows you to transfer your skills, yeah?
Okay. I'm just looking at your list of awards, and they're so long. I'm just actually going to read out a few of them. And you were awarded an OBE, which is a fantastic honor, in 2002. In 2003, you also were awarded the Media and Arts Award at the Asian Jewel Awards. In 2001, you won the Asian Women of Achievement Award for Media and the Windrush Diversity Award, and you were also given an honorary degree. How does that feel, sitting at this point in your career? Do you feel like that you've kind of achieved what you needed to, or is there some next step now that you and PVL feel is where you want to go?
No, I think the challenges are always there, and I think it's nice to get those acknowledgements and recognition, and particularly the Asian Women of Achievement Awards was given, is an organization that Pinky Lalani founded, so it was really a recognition from within the Asian community. The OBE is contribution and cumulative of 25 years of working in the industry and sustaining oneself in the mainstream of, the British film and television industry. But for me, the challenges continue. I have two daughters. It's ensuring that they continue to pursue their passions. For me, the challenge now is how to take 25 years of my learning and be the bridge between the UK creative, media and creative industries and the emerging markets, and in particular India.
Okay. Paramjeet, let's start with you now. We have a
long question.
Yeah, so there basically, you started with the Inland Revenue, you went on to work with Price Waterhouse. You've now had incredible longevity in the banking industry with 17 years at JP Morgan in one of the most cutthroat professional environments you can have. Tell us a little bit about, your career and some of the challenges that you faced in it.
It's a hard act to follow. I think my story was actually a little bit accidental to start with, because I was born and brought up in Kenya. And when I did my A-levels there, I was thinking that my career was going to be in ophthalmic optics. So I was actually meant to be at City University studying that subject. But, we had some family circumstances that didn't work out. So actually, I just turned up in a job centre in the first week when I landed in the UK. And the only job that they had on offer was actually as a clerical officer in HMRC. I got promoted in that first interview because they said, actually, you can come in as an admin officer, which was one level higher. So I started more out of desperation than anything else because I needed a job at that point where, it was a slightly strange introduction to the country. But I did meet with some people very quickly, and this was obviously in the late 70s. Where they kind of plucked me and said, okay, there's more you can do. You've had to interrupt your education. So I started to sit the exams within HMRC, and I went through the ranks and somehow ended up becoming an executive officer within HMRC doing VAT. So it was all kind of very accidental. And at that time, I got married during those years. I hadn't quite thought through where the career would end. But when I got married and the way things were going, I was starting to get a little bit jaded with continually being out on the streets, doing the inspections. And it was a random advert in the Evening Standard for a PwC job at Pricewaterhouse at the time, where they were looking for tax specialists. So I really did apply for that in a complete act of chance. But when I went for that interview, something kind of just clicked. And so I joined them pretty much at the bottom of the ladder, and I then sort of stuck it out for 9 years with them, had my children during that period, and having started as a low-ranking tax specialist, I left on partner track as a senior managing tax consultant. So it was very hard work, particularly in those years, where at my interview, as you can see, fairly conventionally dressed, and some of the challenges in those times, it was kind of quite difficult to break into such a blue chip company. And
was it difficult on the basis of gender or race or?
Not at all on gender at the time. I've just as a matter of personal choice, have always dressed in trousers rather than skirts. At that time, the uniform in the city was pinstriped skirts and fairly short ones above the knee. No people, and so I suppose that was my first hurdle. Yeah. That they thought I was capable of doing the role, but the topic about fitting into the mold came up, and I said, okay, guys, maybe this isn't for me then. And at that point, the policy changed, and within 6 months, the policy for Pricewaterhouse changed that women could wear trousers, and I feel I could be happy with that. And of course, when I had my children at Pricewaterhouse, those were the days before you had your personal laptops. And in fact, I had my first computer on my desk after my first son was born. So I was very much supported as an individual from quite a different background, and obviously not having come through the conventional schooling, I really learned through experience, but I was given all the fair chances, so I think that was good. But then trying to maintain and grow that career when you're pitted against some of the best academics and you're working with clients, I think some of the slightly more trickier moments came when you went to the clients. I was specialised really in the charity sector and in the finance sector even then. So I think sometimes people got a bit of a shock when I turned up. But really,
you make it sound so easy when you're saying it, but it's incredibly hard.
It was.
For all of your careers to kind of progress up the ranks, and so the level of sacrifice with three sons.
Yes.
And trying to then go from Pricewaterhouse into an investment bank. How did you cope?
Well, it was very, very tough actually, because when I had my sons when I had the first child at Pricewaterhouse, I'd said to them I wanted a little bit of flexibility. And after a lot of push and pull, I did my first bit of trailblazing around flexible working. So I got a 3-day week. And then when the twins came along, I said, well, actually, I want a shorter day. I want to do, X hours in the office, and the rest I'll do from home. It was incredibly hard. And we had some crazy conversations around how it was costing the firm to pay for my seat the whole all day, but actually was going to work from home. I won the day, but it wasn't easy. But I did continue working all the way through. But the reason why I did leave Pricewaterhouse at that time was I felt I needed more flexibility than I was getting. So I made the point. I got headhunted actually by the banking industry. So for a short period, I went to the First National Bank of Chicago, and then from there to JP Morgan.
And I find it hard to see how JP Morgan could be a slightly more flexible arrangement than Pricewaterhouse. It's probably some of the longest hours in the city, I would have thought.
Well, I was headhunted by the head of tax at JP Morgan because I suppose by then my reputation around work was established. But when I said, look, I'm only going to come into this job if I can actually get the flexibility around my children. My twins were born very prematurely, and I myself had some pretty significant health challenges at the time, but I needed to work. Needs drive. And he said, I'm fine with that. You'll have to convince HR. So we had 2 hours with HR, and I ended up with the contract which said, let's try this. And you can, so I agreed core hours of 10 to 4:30 in the office, and then I'd be on call. I did very long hours from home. But I was used to, very little sleep with having had the children. So JP Morgan got used to me being ahead of the game because I used to log in at 3 a.m. By then, the personal laptop had come in. Yeah. So 3 a.m, I was logged in. By the time they came in at 8 a.m, I'd already done a half a day's work. So I could, cook for the children, take them to school, and get into the office by 10, and I'd still be ahead of the game. So
it's a lot of commitment there and sacrifice. Also, just looking at, just in the same way that, Parminder has all these awards, you have all of these, organizations, international kind of tax panels you sit on, British Bankers Association, European Fund and Asset Managers Association, the OECD Tax Committee, and, you also oversight 70 countries at the same time. That's extraordinary. I mean, and you're lobbying at the same time for tax changes to legislation. Mm-hmm. How does one bring all of that together?
Well, I think it takes time to build a career. When I first joined JP Morgan, I was their first full-time indirect tax person. And over the next sort of 7 to 8 years, we went through so many mergers. This firm has grown. When I first joined JP Morgan, there were about 18,000 people worldwide. There are now 230,000 people. So in a sense, the company grew, my role grew. I grew my team. I like to think I recruited really good people. So you can't do everything yourself. You have to build teams. You have to, you have to have integrity in your functions. So you've got to have that business model. You've got to be able to sell it. And I think in the world of tax, indirect taxes have always been behind the curve compared to corporate income taxes or personal taxes. And I think one of the things I feel good about is that I joined this industry at a point where I kind of had that vision. So today, if you look at the way the whole kind of profile of taxation is going for corporates, personal taxation across the world, it is indirect taxes that the governments are really going after. So I think I kind of had that vision for myself, and then I did manage to convince a lot of people along the way. So I think the lobbying, well, once you become proficient in your subject, it's not good enough just to sit at your desk and do what anybody tells you to do. You have to kind of look into where you want it to go, and you become responsible for that portfolio. So I think it's kind of happened at that level because
How do you feel about the negativity that banking is getting as a profession at the moment, where they're blamed for the entire, I know in Feni, but for the entire financial crisis, exactly. And what's your view on that?
My boys will tell you I'm very vocal when I watch some of the Question Time news and Newsnight programs. I think I think on the to accept where responsibility is clearly aligned. There was some greed. There was a lack of foresight on the part of certain sectors of the banking industry. But I think it's pretty unfair and probably a little bit driven by ignorance. The fact that actually the regulation allowed all these things to happen, the fact that people had an appetite for debt, and it's a house of cards that didn't happen in one country. It kind of blew down globally. So in a way, the bankers are good scapegoats, and I suppose they have broad shoulders, they can take it. But I do feel that the banking industry is made up of a heck of a lot of people who really graft at the lower grades, and they really, really do, put in an honest day's work like anybody else. So the so-called casino banks and all the things that go with that, I think it's a little bit unfair. But then I would say that.
Okay, and in terms of since you started in JP Morgan 17 years ago and now, do you see a lot more Sikhs coming through, and do you see in particular a lot of Sikh women coming through into these professions? And what advice would you give a Sikh woman who, looking at you in this panel, says, I would love to have that career? That would be fantastic.
It's a very interesting question. I would say that 10 years ago, it was really, really difficult to find a Sikh man or woman who could be seen and identified and actually, noted in any way at any senior level. Now, I'm really happy to see that in a lot of city organizations, not just the financial sector, but you do actually see young men and women getting into the industry. So I think we really are in a good position because children are educating themselves in a diverse range of careers, and I think the opportunities for us are there. But like at any time in our history, I think the ethos of hard work, if you bring that to any career, I think you can get success. And I think in the UK, most of us are probably a testament to the fact that hard work pays off. And I think for the kids of today and people who are coming in, hopefully the ride is a little bit easier because there's more of us.
That's true. Thank you. Harjeet. You went from state school in London here and then to Oxford. And what would you say to Sikhs out there who are maybe looking at their university applications and thinking, Oxford's not for me. I don't have the right background. I didn't go to private school. I'm going to go there and I'm going to be, the one who sticks out, the one who, is kind of left by the wayside. What would you say to those people?
What I would say is that if you don't try, you're never going to succeed. And if you place barriers in front of yourself at the very start, then you're going to hinder yourself. If you let those barriers fall away and realise that everybody's human, everyone can use opportunities that are there, then you can make use of those opportunities. I went to a state school. I thought about Oxford as being a very, very it just didn't seem real to me that I would be able to gain a place to read medicine there. But I thought, well, if I don't try, then I'll never know. So I networked and I spoke to my teachers. I spoke to other people that I knew that maybe had siblings that had gone through the interview process. So I prepared myself and thought, it's best to go for it. If you don't get the place, it doesn't matter. There are other places to try. And so I was pretty kind of gung-ho about it in some ways, and was pleasantly surprised because I have to say it was the best experience of my life. And I realised that it's not full of children that have been to private school. There are actually a lot of state school men and women that are educated at these universities. So I think it's important not to close off opportunities, but to make sure that you give yourself every chance possible, because you have one life and you've got to make the most of it and grab any opportunities that come your way, because one door then will lead to another, and it can lead to an amazing career. So I guess take the opportunities that come your way and put the hard work in as well.
The hard work in. So an open mind to applying to Oxford and to go for it. You then kind of left Oxford and you kind of went into clinical medicine for a number of years, and you now head up a medical team in immunology. So what does that entail?
Well, firstly, I worked in the NHS for 5 years and had a fantastic time. But it got to a point where I wanted to seek new challenges with my career, and started to explore other options and felt that the pharmaceutical industry would provide me with the challenges that I wanted. So throughout my time in industry, I've sort of progressed from starting as a junior medic to managing a team of other doctors, and we work at developing new therapies in a number of diseases that target autoimmune conditions, so conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease, to name sort of two common conditions. And it's exciting. It's it's also challenging as well, because there is always this sense, particularly in the UK, that the pharmaceutical industry is not helping the country. It's there to hinder developments in the NHS, sort of access to drugs. But actually, if you look at the amount of revenue it brings in from an economic perspective, it's the second grossing industry in the UK, I think, behind the finance sector. And it provides a huge number of jobs as well. And it's bringing innovation to the UK, which is a huge part of the work that we do. And it's providing access to new products for patients, thereby improving the quality of life and long-term outcomes for patients. This is not just in the UK, but globally. So having seen sort of both the NHS side of things as well as the industry side of things, it's really opened my eyes to all the good work that's carried out.
So after Oxford, and once you'd started being a doctor, you joined as a board member on the Sikh Scholarship Foundation. And you've worked with people who some people might recognize as Harinder Singh at Sikh Research Institute was one of the educators, and the Sikh Coalition, Harpreet Kaur as well. And tell us a little bit about the Sikh Scholarship Foundation and what it was trying to do.
It was a fantastic initiative, and obviously you were one of the founding partners of the organisation. Its main purpose was to provide funding for kids that wanted to come to Oxford or Cambridge, and to really help them from a financial perspective, but also to enable them to understand the importance of Sikhism, the principles of Sikhism, and incorporate those principles within the work that they did and their everyday life. So I think it was a combination of providing a grant, but also incorporating the principles of Sikhism. It's very much similar to the Rhodes Scholarship that has run from the US. And I have to say, all the candidates that managed to secure a scholarship were all outstanding individuals that have gone on to great positions in their future careers. So I think it was a fantastic initiative that really also raised the profile of Sikhs within the university.
At the time of Guru Nanak, the environment for women was very much like Taliban Afghanistan, if not worse, where women were basically objects and they had no rights. Guru Nanak started out by saying that, how can anything that comes from a woman be superior to a woman? And the other gurus fought over a period of 240 years to establish women's rights. When they were doing this, it was actually extremely dangerous. It was, there were complaints to the Emperor Akbar at the time that there was an introduction of dangerous ideas by these Sikhs. But there was interwoven throughout Sikh history in the Guru period prominent examples of women, from Bibi Nanaki, Guru Nanak's sister, who bought his first rabab for him and recognized his spirituality, to Bibi Amro, who introduced Guru Amar Das to Guru Angad. And then Guru Amar Das himself, of the 72 missionaries he had to spread the Sikh faith, he selected 22 women to go out and do that. So that's, about a third, which is more than we see on most Gurdwara committees today. Mai Bago, a lot of people know about her as one of the women who fought by the Guru's side when the men were not prepared to do so. But she was also the personal bodyguard of Guru Gobind Singh and stood outside his tent. And that's something which a lot of women don't know. Guru Tegh Bahadur as well, he meditated for 26 years, and his female relatives took care of him during that time. In the time of Guru Gobind Singh as well, there was a lot of rape and molestation of Sikh women by the Mughals, and some of the Sikhs approached the Guru and they said, why can't we do the same back to the women on the other side? And the Guru said, because that's not somewhere we're going to go. We're going to stick by our principles, which are respecting women, and we're not going to rape and molest their women because they do it to us. So that's a lesson we're not going to teach, and it's not something we will do. Post the Guru period, after Banda Singh Bahadur, there was a continuation of these rights, in the sense that it was common for Hindu women to be enslaved by the Mughals and taken into slavery. And when they passed through Punjab, Sikhs would often intervene to rescue those women and free them from slavery. That was a very prominent role, which was played by Sikhs at that time. And in addition, you also had Sikh women like Sharon Kaur, who rescued the bodies of the two oldest Gurnaam Singh's sons, and the other 40 Shaheed Singhs who died with them, and she cremated them. And she did this at great personal risk to herself, going in to actually pick up the bodies from the battlefield when surrounded by the enemy. So that was kind of the history of Sikh women, where you can see, it's difficult for us now to imagine how anti, women's rights that era was. But over 240 years, the Gurus clearly fought very hard to establish women's rights. What is your role? What is your view for the panel generally of Sikh women's rights today? Where do we stand on these issues?
Clearly, we continue the baton. Sikh women haven't given up the struggle, the challenge, the fight. You've got we're just 3 examples of Sikh women who continue to strive, who continue to open new doors and rise to new challenges. And when I was just recently in Punjab, that Sikh women are not cowed down. They're not silenced in that way. Yeah, I mean, there are phenomenally successful Sikh women entrepreneurs across India and in Punjab, all over the world, wherever. I mean, I was astounded by a figure which said there are 130 million Punjabis, i.e. Punjabi being East and West Punjab, but and the Sikh diaspora is huge. So I think what the Gurus started, the recognition that women are equal to them and that they have an equal role to play, and that women have a role to play in the home as well as on the battlefield. And the modern contempt, of that is that we have a role to play in the home. We've all raised our children and they seem pretty okay, and we have sustained phenomenal careers and we've sustained marriages, and been very successful at it. So I think Sikh women today, they have many, many positive role models to turn to.
And do you think, Paramjeet, let me ask you something. Do you think that it's the female role models for Sikh women are prominent enough? Because, I know growing up, I had historical role models. But, when you look around at the community, a lot of the time you see male faces, you see men representing the community at all levels, and we don't really get to hear a lot, from Sikh women.
I think that's a really good point, actually. I think as we're hearing on the panel, as far as personal careers and women's ambition is concerned, I do think we are all very privileged that we're in a time where education is freely available, and most of our parents have strived so hard to give us that platform. So I think that's good. And from where I'm sitting, I think in the majority of cases, girls have equal opportunities, so that is good. But the point you made about the Gurdwaras and our institutions and in the Sikh society as a general, I think in our sort of, we're a sort of second, third generation in the UK. And I think in the first kind of couple of decades, women probably concentrated more on building their homes and perhaps raising their kids. And we do run the risk that in doing that, we switch off the other side of ourselves, which is to actually be properly involved in the civic side of our life. And I think the concept of Miri Piri in Sikhi does mean that every individual, doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you do need to live life fully. And I think I would say more broadly as a community, we probably don't get into politics. We don't get into the media in front of the camera enough. We don't organize ourselves enough to actually be in a position to state our views. We just get on with it and do the work, which is great because, that is the foundation of all things. But having got to the stage where we have now, I think the broader community needs to actually polish its act and make sure we display outwards better than we do today. But I think when it comes to women, the fact that we're not in the Gurdwaras, I think this is actually a twofold issue. One, I think the Gurdwaras are perhaps currently a little bit intimidating in the sense that there's an established practice of how the membership works. But really, since when did we become victims? I think we have to become members of the Gurdwaras and we have to take active participative roles. And through that, you will then bring change. So I think there is definitely a gap there. Sorry.
Yeah, I reiterate that. I think there's a lot of modesty amongst the Sikh female community. I think there are a lot of, as both of you are clear examples, of very high-profile women that have achieved a tremendous amount. But I think that modesty holds us back compared to other communities. So I think increased visibility of women who are Sikh out there in the professional world will reap benefits for the whole community.
But I also think, if we're talking about Sikh institution, whether it's the Gurdwaras or whatever other, I'd say probably is the religious institution. Is that right? Where women are still in the background, even though when you and I, we go to the Gurdwaras, it's the women who are keeping that institution ticking every day. They're the ones who are there, cooking the foods, cleaning the place. The service that the Gurdwara that I go to in Southampton is phenomenal. But I would turn it around and say to the men on those who run those institutions, do you realize you're missing an opportunity? Do you realize you're missing the opportunity of getting a diversity of views and ideas at how an organization can be run and can be managed, yeah? And that actually, yes, we as Sikh women could take that institution on. Here is this, you're taking on JP Morgan and tax and immunization and the media. We are taking on many big institutions outside. But, come on, Sikh men, look at what you're missing out, yeah, by not inviting us to be included in the debates and discussions in the institution that you're running. It's you who are keeping that institution behind, yeah?
Should we wait to be invited,
No.
or should it be that we are proactive to kind of push ourselves onto that table of discussion?
That's what I was thinking. I think, yes, we can certainly lead that push, but I also think that their own consciousness and awareness has to be raised. I mean, I've sort of been amongst, the Asian business networks, and I am probably one or two women faces that you see. It's a very male-dominated networks, yeah? Whether they're in the financial sector, whether they're in the retail sector, in the business, in the entrepreneur sector, they are, men network, and we don't network in that way. But I think, just as I put a pressure on the mainstream media that you have to take the lead in change, so I think our Sikh organizations have to say, go to their committee meeting and say, hey, this is a room full of men. Where are the women?
So creating the right environment, effectively, and not a little boys' club where, women feel that, if I come in here, I'm going to be viewed in a particular way. I'm not going to be able to make any inroads. I don't have partners to work with.
I was going to, if it's okay, just to talk about this a little bit.
I was going to actually introduce your UK council work. I was going to say you are on the you are on the executive for the UK Sikh Council, and can you tell us a little bit about your work there? Because I know you've been dealing with rights issues in Europe, and how do you find it working with? I'm sure it's 90% male or more. More. 99% male organisation. And there you go.
So you can see I'm passionate about that too, because I was kind of grabbing the mic. It's interesting because, the Sikh Council, I have not previously belonged to any Gurdwara institution membership, so didn't do any of that while the kids were growing up. But when the Sikh Channel first started to run this campaign about we ought to have a council, we need to have an umbrella organisation that brings various Sikh existing organisations and various forums together so that we have an umbrella. So the Sikh Council was kind of really touted on the Sikh Channel as being something that anyone could apply to, and people were very engaged. There were some huge open meetings, and I started to get a little bit piqued by that, thinking, oh, this is interesting. And I've always wanted to kind of share a little bit of, some of the experiences of bringing up the boys, and they were there when they first started with their Chotia Gutta and then the Jude and then the Stara, all the issues that we went through in the schools, and you just wanted to kind of get that over. So there was a little bit of an interest. when the council was formed, so I volunteered into it, and I attended about 3 meetings to decide. So they'd formed these subcommittees, and I thought I would go for the strategy and legal policy, thinking I really want to talk about education. I want to think about issues inward facing towards the community. But in the end, I found myself drifting into the European and International Affairs Committee because, you know, what became very clear to me is as a society, as a community, we are firefighting. So when an issue comes up, we kind of go out there with our banners and we march and we obviously fight for our rights. But what we don't do is invest in the right dialogue. We don't participate in the forums where policy is being made effectively enough. And certainly for Sikhs sitting in the UK, you know, a lot of the human rights related legislation actually comes out of Europe. So the work that I've got involved in is actually in that space. But it's been very interesting because I've probably been the most prominent volunteer for the council, and certainly the only prominent female who's stuck it out as long as I have. So I've kind of made myself a bit of a nuisance, and so I ended up on the executive. There is one other lady who's a councillor in Redbridge, Balvinder Sond, who's also on the executive. So there's 2 of us out of the total group of 51.
Okay, and on the when you deal with you know, Sikh issues in Europe, you've met ministers from France, you've met ministers from Italy. How receptive are they to the points that you make, and do you feel like that there's, you know, the UK Sikh Council from this perspective and yourself can actually make a difference?
Absolutely. I think my first experience was very heartening because, as I said, I joined the council around May time last year, and around sort of August, September, there was a huge amount of uproar. In fact, from around June, July, we were having lots of noise. We were getting noise from Europe around the stars being searched in a very ineffective way across airports, and the Italian situation had become really painful. And I just became very frustrated, and I started to write cold emails, just using the Sikh Council as the brand to work with, to say, you know, we don't have a country, we don't come from a political point of view. We happen to be a community that is underrepresented. So could we have a meeting, and could we talk about it? And I used to list the issues. And it was amazing because the meeting in Italy was with a minister from the Interior Ministry, from the head of the Border Guard, the Civil Aviation Authority, and somebody very, very senior from the Foreign Office. And as a result of that meeting, we managed to agree a new protocol of how they were going to do the screening at the Italian airports. Now, no amount of marching was going to take care of that. We did march. We as a community showed our feeling. I'm sure that helped us to secure the meeting that we got. But in terms of the receptiveness at the other end, you know, I think they almost get bowled over when they find that, you know, the equality. There was a woman talking, there were men with me. But actually, we do come in equally. And when I went to the European Commission, the first time I met with the department that deals with social justice and equality and, you know, gender-related issues. And I wanted to kind of talk to them about how do we get the Sikh religion, the Sikh faith and the requirements of this minority community registered where policies are made, because clearly something's not working because we have lots of challenges. And so I said to her, am I making sense? Do you know the Sikhs? Do you know the Sikh religion? She says, well, actually, you're the first person sitting in that chair who's asked me that question. And frankly, no, I don't. So I started off with a very short précis, and I said, you know, all about, you know, monotheistic, you know, there's very recent history. It's a, you know, it's an individual faith. It's a pact between you and your maker, and there is equality. There's no caste, there's no creed, there's equality. And she says, well, I can see that. You're sitting here in front of me. So, you know, they do like to talk to you.
So, okay, given all of that, let me put, we've talked about, you know, there are a lot of opportunities for Sikh women in many ways, and there's a lot of successful Sikh women out there, not always public, not always engaging with institutions, but it's there. You know, there's that mass, and it's kind of developing and hopefully coming to greater and greater prominence at both the Sikh consciousness level and at the national and international levels. And you know, hopefully we'll have a Sikh women MP at some point in Britain, maybe someone from the panel. But there is the other side, which is, and I'm sure you've all heard it, you know, munde kar de, kuryani kar de. There's that mentality, you know, in families. And there is also, you know, when I speak to Southall Black Sisters, they have 3,000 reports of domestic violence a year. Of those, 60% are Sikh women. So 5 Sikh women a day call Southall Black Sisters to report domestic violence. what are we as Sikh women, are we, first of all, are we aware enough of that side of, our community? Are we supportive enough of the institutions like Southall Black Sisters who actually deal on a day-to-day basis with these women? And, is there a whole kind of, in a sense, almost a section of women in our society that are increasingly marginalized, they're not helped, and they're treated pretty badly? Add to this, in the Punjab, female feticide amongst Sikhs, where 13% of female Sikh fetuses are aborted before pregnancy because it's seen better to have a son. And there's still a bit of this munda mentality, where the munde can do this, the kuriya can't do this. Given everything we've said about equality and opportunity, what is the size of this battle facing us? And to what extent are professional Sikh women engaged, or should they be engaged?
I think you've raised a real problem that we face in our community. I certainly wasn't aware of the extent of the levels of the problems that you've illustrated. So I think there is a need for education amongst certain sectors of the community to really bring home the level that women are suffering in certain groups of the Sikh community. But I also think there's an educational need for the professional sectors as well to really understand just how deep-rooted the problem is. So I think we need to work proactively to try and address this, because I certainly wasn't aware of the extent of the problem.
I'm aware of this. It was way back in the 1980s that we set up. I was amongst the women who set up Southall Black Sisters. And domestic violence was one of the biggest issues within our community. I'm talking about the early 1980s. So this isn't a new issue. I think the thing that, and it's not surprising, we set up Southall Black Sisters in Southall. And there was always a contradiction. Here was the Sikh community that really took on the national front in 1979 when they came marching into Southall, and we were all there, united, men, women, young and old, and yet on the other side was this extraordinary levels of violence. So as Asian women and as Sikh women, we took up that issue a long time ago, and we fought for the resources, and we continue to fight for those those resources. And Southall Black Sisters have not had an easy ride in being and remaining where they are, yeah? So it's a real, we all have to support the work that Southall Black Sisters is doing. But I also think, the Sikh community does, it's a phenomenal challenge, yeah? In terms of the gross imbalance between boys and girls. As I said, I've just come back from Punjab, and one of the things that I learnt there was that this disproportion between men and women is causing Sikh, well, at one level you could say it's a good thing, but they're having to import so-called foreign wives. And wives are coming from, Bengali community, they call them foreign, they are Indian, huh? Or South India, i.e. that they are having to, because there's a lack of, there's now, the women, the presence of women is the ratio between men and women is so small now that they are having to bring in, marry women from outside, which obviously has its other challenges of integrating different cultures within the Sikh. So I heard in Punjab that they are beginning to address that issue, that they recognize it's a big issue and that they are beginning to address it. But it's something that maybe we could do a bit more in the UK to highlight, how profound it is back in Punjab. I'm not sure that obviously doesn't happen in the UK. And I think the feisty young Sikh girls who are growing up in Britain will not tolerate, oh, the boy can do this and the girl can't do this. I'd like to think our children are much more challenging, and we have allowed them to be more challenging as parents, yeah?
Yeah, I think you made some really good points. I've started to form the view a while ago when I sort of look at what's really causing this, what's going wrong, both in Punjab and here, because I think, Ashminda, as you were saying, the level of calls that are still going in around the Sikh community complaining about domestic abuse, women complaining about the abuse, that is still such an acute issue today that, in a way you have to question what is the fundamental reason. And I do think that we have kind of forgotten to live by Sikh values. And I think our education within the homes, within the gurdwaras, as a broader community, has failed to deliver on that point. I do say that advisedly. I think we're very lucky, those of us who are kind of sitting here talking about this, because we've clearly come from homes where that hasn't been an issue. But it is remarkable in how many homes it is an issue. And where is it getting fed from? And why isn't it getting arrested? And I think for that, we've talked about, you mentioned the roles of Mai Pak or our history. Yeah. I mean, all the things that you've said, I'm sure the viewers, there are people who are enlightened and there aren't. But I would say that for myself, I'm ashamed to say that I probably didn't know as much about them in my 20s and 30s as I do now. And so I think it'd be very interesting to see where and what age group is the group that's actually getting affected the most. But I think the education around what a Sikh ethos kind of education around standing up for yourself, not becoming a victim. If you're a woman and you're ending up in a position, how do you stop that? Because it's partly the environment, but it's also how you react to the environment. And then when you become parents, how do you parent? How are you dealing with things? So I think it's a matter of education.
Okay. And so do you think Sikh girls are receiving the kind of support that they need in terms of both, if you look at it from a Sikh perspective, they say that, the mother starts transmitting spirituality to the child when they're in the womb. And then during the formative years of the child, until they're influenced by the world, the mother is really the kind of wisdom element, and the father is more the santok, the steadfast element. And that those influences then stick with the child for the rest of their life. To what extent do you think Sikh women should kind of more actively and professional women as well should take a stand going around to Sikh women, Sikh girls, and kind of educating them, first of all, in terms of their history, and second of all, in terms of their rights, and do we just bypass the gurdwaras? Are they just useless in this arena? Or I've yet to find a single gurdwara that's ever addressed the issues of domestic violence, alcoholism in the community, which maybe Harjeet is something you can address. All drug abuse. Where are these issues getting addressed? Obviously not in the Gurdwara forum. So as Sikh women who are primarily the victims of both, these kind of abuses, and also the people who have to take care of it, what should we be doing? And should we work outside the Gurdwara system, and how?
I think my view is it's not just the role of the mother. It's both parents need to take an active role in educating their children. I think it's just as powerful if the education comes from the father, because it empowers a girl to realise that when she is eventually married, that her father's perspective is that that sort of thing shouldn't happen, and I think it makes her stronger to deal with such a situation should it arise. It's not purely the mother's role. So I think education, not only from the mother's side but from the father's side, is important. So it's a cross-community thing. It's not just sort of a female issue. So for me, that's an important thing. And I was incredibly lucky. Both my parents were equally supportive of education. My father was very much, it doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, you are going to achieve whatever ambitions you want to achieve. And I think that ethos and empowerment of women should come not just from the mother but from the father as well, and that's really in keeping with the Sikh ethos in my eyes.
And how about sorry?
Yeah, I just want to say I think one of the things that I get worried about is that we hiding behind the cultural curtain, and particularly if we're living in this country where that we don't want to wash our laundry in public, or we don't want to talk about the negative stuff, yeah? Well, if we don't want to talk about it publicly, then we as a community needs to firstly accept the fact that it happens. What are the causes? It is alcoholism. A friend of mine works in Ealing in drug in a center for rehabilitation of drug users, and she says, the large number of people who come into that are from the Sikh community, yeah? So, you know, drugs and alcohol, I mean, you know, and living in the kind of social environment. But I think we as a community needs to find other frameworks within which to address it. South All Black Sisters is one. The Sikh Council is another place to raise those issues, and not just rely on the Gurdwara, because that's where there's a kind of compliance and there's a kind of, I don't know, a self-censoring silence. You know, a lot of those women who are sitting in that Gurdwara are going through this, but they won't talk about it, and they won't because, you know, I mustn't say this because it will bring a bad name to my and dishonor my family. So we've got to start talking about it.
I think that brings me back to your question around, should this be solutioned around the Gurdwara, or should it be handled by women outside of that? And I feel quite strongly that until we bring these issues into a, you know, into the mainstream, so it mustn't just be a women's issue, because if you take it out of the Gurdwara, not only are you taking it out of the place where actually the good moral fibre should flow, but you're also separating it from that community hub. So I think it would be quite important to do that. And one of the things that the Sikh Council is thinking about is under their community safety subcommittee on what are the things that one could do around making it possible for people to come to someone. Now, it's going to take time to build a fabric like that, but I think in some of the northern Gurdwaras that I've seen in the north of England, you know, there is more of a community environment. There are people who are actually taking these calls and acting as Samaritans in their own local Gurdwara. We've done it with the marital situation where people are still looking for, you know, arranged marriages and they want help, and the Gurdwaras have stepped up to that. So I think we need to get to that level where and we have both men and women who can take on that confidentiality service and offer a helpline or whatever. Because I think until we bring that issue into the mainstream, we have to do it in a sensitive way. We have to make sure it's not tittle-tattle. But I think we have to bring it into the Gurdwara in a very meaningful way. So I personally feel there's a lot of work to be done here, and hopefully all my colleagues at the council are listening.
And do you think that men in our community aren't comfortable dealing with these issues? Or do you think it's just that why is this not dealt with by men vocally, given that they form over 90% of our leadership?
Well, I would say it's not just the men. I would say it is that cultural curtain that we don't want to wash our dirty linen in public, and it'll probably be the extended family too that doesn't want it discussed, you know. So I think we have to respect that you know, clearly people need confidentiality and they need support, but I think it's a bit it is a bit of a gap in our kind of fabric of how we're running the community, that we don't have institutions where children or young women or young men, you know, it could be, the abuse could be either way, they don't have anywhere to go to at the moment. So if they will go and talk to the local priest, he's not necessarily going to be the best person, because of course,
you know, his visa will expire in 2 years and he won't be there. So.
Right.
Sorry, just one thing to add, which is that if alcohol and drug abuse are the root cause of some of these problems, then educational programs that perhaps are more targeted to the community, you know, could help address this. I've not seen such programs in any Gurdwaras that I've been to, and given that there is definitely an increased risk in certain communities, such as the Sikh community, of complications that can arise from alcohol abuse and drug abuse, etc.
It's medical conditions.
Yeah, that I think there really is an educational need to really drive home the message that this needs to change.
But I also think who's going to lead that? You know, I was 20-something when we said there is a problem in our community way back in the 80s, right? And we're going to form South All Black Sister. That's just one, and many other, you know, centres which were supporting women of domestic violence were set up. But, you know, where's the 20-something today who's going to... Because it also has to be, you know, it's not the elderly priest of 70, 80, 60 plus, yeah? I'm trying to get them their mindset, yeah? It's got to come from the younger generation. It's got to come from people like yourself and you know, the educated younger professional to say, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. and begin to actually organize and do something about it. So it's not, it's not abdicating responsibility to someone else. It's actually saying, to the younger generation, 20-something, you're responsible citizens, yeah? You're seeing this in your community, do something about it.
Would you draw a distinction between Sikh culture and the kind of cruder Punjabi culture, which is kind of about, which is it has its advantages, but there's the whole concept of you have what's called a Jalandhar single, which is measured between your forefinger, and it's a whole kind of men hard drinking, hard partying kind of mentality, which while it's there's an overlap between Punjabi culture and Sikh culture. There's a certain type of, sometimes we see this, sometimes we don't, but there's a certain type of crude alcohol culture among Sikh men, which is out there, and which women are generally excluded from, in the sense that we don't really engage in it. When women drink, they tend to do it more privately, or they tend to, not do it in the same way. How do you address the alcohol issue with Sikh men?
I think that's a tricky one. I have to say personally, I think the earthiness of the Punjabi culture is something that, that I think is great, because it brings a real sense of being down to earth, I think, in our community, and not sort of, I think you kind of know what I'm trying to say.
So basically balance we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's a balance between the two. I think there are some individuals that perhaps go beyond that boundary, but I feel that the majority of the Punjabi men, Sikh men, fall within the sort of the safe boundaries of having fun, but not going overboard. I think for the minority that there are definitely problems arising, education is going to be the way forward. It's not an easy answer, because education can take many different forms, and working out what sort of initiative will work best with that sector of the community will take a lot of work, but I think that's probably going to be the way forward.
Okay.
I think I'm probably going to be a little bit controversial, but I'll go for it.
Yeah.
I think we sometimes run the risk of mixing the kind of the ethnic Punjabi group with the Sikh religion, because I think if you talk about Punjabi culture, the Bhangra shows, the have a laugh, the down to earth earthiness of community relationships, having a good time. That is a very separate thing to the role of alcohol in the life of a Sikh. If you go, I have to say this, a Sikh believing in the Das Gurus and Guru Granth Sahib, the code of conduct that we have, this is a complete antithesis to what is actually required. So I can't possibly say that, the halfway house works. I think the education around why do people feel that alcohol or drugs are necessary for us to still enjoy the Punjabi culture or the Sikh culture, because culture versus religion, I think, are two different things. And I think the culture is hugely rich. Our food, our fun, our festivals, these are all wonderful things that we can enjoy. But when you have that crossover between culture and religion, and the word Sikh really is more religious than the word Punjabi. So I think the Punjabi culture versus the Sikh religion, I would really like to draw that distinction, because I think the one is actually very different from the other. And from an educational perspective,
I totally agree with that. Having in my late life, my father gave me 4 volumes of the Granth Sahib when I was very young in English, and I just wrapped them up and put them on a shelf and said, one day I will read them. And it was only when he passed away that I opened those books and started reading them in 2008, I think it was. And it took me 3 years of reading, a chapter every day, but it's an English translation. And I thought, wow, I started, my first language was Punjabi, though I don't read Punjabi anymore. But the depth, the beauty of that text. And I thought, wow, everyone should read the Granth Sahib. Yeah? And I think I've often that we have, the codes of conduct, the values in our but actually we've got caught in the rituals of Sikhism rather than in what its the essence of its message. Yeah,
it's a relationship of love with your guru.
absolutely.
Right, and if I can go just one more further, it's I do feel, sorry, this is one of the reasons why I agreed to be on the panel. Being involved in the council and having gone through the career that I have myself, and being my father's daughter, I bring those three things together. There is absolutely nothing that our gurus have given us that stops us being the top scientists, doctors, whatever we want to be, because Girt Karni is a fundamental. You know, we're told, go out there, go do. Don't just speak, go do. So that's fine. I think when it comes to being happy and enjoying family relationships, Babaji says, don't, be a gristi. Don't be an aesthetic. Do everything. Live your life. Live it fully, but do it consciously. You don't have to be half out of it to actually, you know what I mean? So yeah. I think these are things which I think a lot of people now, because they don't, there is a language issue, perhaps there is an issue around how the prachar is done. That certainly my kids, I've when they were younger, I certainly used to. I was very lucky because my father was in a Khand party, so I had the benefit of that. But the translation of when you've gone to the Gurdwara and you've heard Maharaj's Vak, what does it mean? What did we read? What did that read? And the fact that is your personal conversation with the Guru, it's only personal if you're listening. If you don't listen, you don't hear that message. So I think that's something that perhaps we as a broader community are not as aware of today as we need to be. So I think the education, whether it's around infanticide or whether it's around drug abuse or whether it's around alcohol, I think we kind of need to get back to core values. And we're very, very lucky as Sikhs that we've got this written down in a very contemporary fashion. They're easy to access. So I think we just need to open the book.
Okay. As a final question to all the women on the panel, if we were having this conversation, let's say in another 10 years' time, what would be your top two things, to have come out of this? Where would you like us to be in 10 years' time versus where we are now? What do you think are the important things to kind of achieve in the next 10 years as a community and as Sikh women? Start with
okay. Okay. That's fine. Well, I think in 10 years' time, I would really like the broader Sikh community to have revisited their own history and their own tradition, so that this question of who are we and what should a Sikh person's values be, I think if that has been refreshed, that'll be great. And I think this whole question, second point was the Miri period point. I agree with you. We need the Sikh MPs, we need the politicians, we need the doctors, academia. Yes, please.
It's very interesting that kind of just follow on from that a little bit. Like with Mata Gujri, when she took the two of Gurnaam Singh's youngest son, the two Shahzades, and they were going to be killed by Wazir Khan at that point. And the last thing she said to them as a grandmother, watching your two youngest grandsons going to be killed, was remember who you are. Yep. So I think that that kind of feeds onto your point, that do we actually remember who we are in the first place? And next to
I think for me it's ensuring that the community continues to be proud to be Sikh, and that can manifest itself in different ways through increased visibility within within public life, but also empowerment as well. So it's really recognising that being a Sikh is important and worthwhile.
Gosh, and I mean, I suppose it's been, as I'm sitting here listening, thinking, is it being a Sikh in the UK, in Canada, in Australia,
everywhere,
in the US, and then obviously being a Sikh in Punjab itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think if I look at it from my own children's point of view, two daughters, 23 and 19, and it's interesting that the 19-year-old is going to Oxford to read Sanskrit, and she was born here and educated here. What I'd like is that they really, this is, in 10 years' time, that a generation has grown to really value ancient wisdom that we have within our community.
Thank you very much. And, let me thank all my fantastic guests, and I'm sure there's a lot there for you to think about as viewers. And let's sign off on this first women's panel for the Sikh Channel and Sikh Think Tank series. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's been extraordinary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My first film I ever produced was as an independent, was a dance drama set in the London Underground. I guess out of all of those, the films that combine social activism, art and culture. So I made a lot of documentaries around what was then called the Third World, Africa, Asia, Latin America. Films on the enforced sterilization of women in India, Algeria, women at war.
So you also co-founded the Cultural Diversity Network, which is an alliance of UK broadcasters that work to create greater diversity in UK film. So how would you see the opportunities for Sikhs wanting a media career now versus when you started?
Well, I think how that was way back in 1996. I looked around at British television and I thought, gosh, if an alien landed in London and walked around London, they would see one London, a multicultural, culturally diverse London, incredibly vibrant, multilingual, and you know, every nation of the world represented here. And yet, when that alien would go home and turn on the television, there would be ethnic cleansing, and there was very clearly a complete lack of representation of Black and Asian talent on the screen. When they did appear, it would be in some stereotypical role, you know, in the soaps, they would be cast as criminals, yeah? Or the Asians would be cast as corner shop owners. And I have deep respect for those people who run corner shops. But the Asian community, Asians in the UK also run other things. We run the National Health Service, we run the bank.
Types, and it becomes very difficult for them to break out.
No, I also think, you know, for me now, you know, 1996, I thought it was really important to take on the establishment, the BBC, the ITV, Channel 4s, Sky, and get them to really change, both from behind the screen and in front of the screen. You know, 2012, when really, where is the demand for content and where is the surgence of creativity and innovation? It's in India, it's in Brazil, it's in Mexico, it's in China. So for me, if you are a camera person, you're a cinematographer, you're a sound recordist, and you are working in any aspect of the industry, you're in business, you're in finance aspect of the industry, you should not limit yourself to the UK. The industry is a global industry, and it's an industry that allows you to transfer your skills, yeah?
Okay. Tanu, I'm just looking at your list of awards, and you know they're so long. I'm just actually going to read out a few of them. And you know, you were awarded an OBE, which is a fantastic honor, in 2002. In 2003, you also were awarded the Media and Arts Award at the Asian Jewel Awards. In 2001, you won the Asian Women of Achievement Award for Media and the Windrush Diversity Award, and you were also given an honorary degree. How does that feel, sitting at this point in your career? Like, you know, do you feel like that you've kind of achieved what you needed to, or is there some next step now that you and PVL feel is, you know, is where you want to go?
No, I think the challenges are always there, and I think it.
Wajji ka Khalsa, Wajji ki Fateh. I'm Ashminda Kaur, and I'd like to welcome you to the first all-women's panel of the Sikh Think Tank series. On our panel today are three exceptional professional Sikh women, and I'm delighted to welcome Parminder Kaur Veer, OBE, an award-winning film and television producer, international speaker, business consultant, who has worked for the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4, amongst other major channels. She's the founder of PVL Media Consultants. In 2002, Parminder Kaur Veer was awarded an OBE for her services to the broadcasting and film in the United Kingdom. She's the board director of the UK Film Council and is a non-executive director of the Department for Culture, Media and Sports. Also on the panel is Parmjeet Kaur Matharu, managing director of a leading global investment bank, JP Morgan, with global tax responsibility spanning approximately 70 countries. Parmjeet is the chair of the VAT Working Group at the British Bankers Association and has a seat at the European Banking Federation and the European Fund and Asset Managers Association. She works for the OECD Tax Committee and Far Eastern trade bodies on tax-related policies and is the only Sikh representative in global indirect tax forums at this level of seniority. Parmjeet is also an executive with the Sikh Council UK and has led negotiations for the rights of Sikhs with the European ministers. And finally, we have Dr. Jeet Kaur, a medical doctor and Oxford graduate who works with a leading pharmaceutical company where she specializes in developing treatments for diseases affecting the immune system.
Yeah, we are across the public and the private sector, yeah, and that just was not reflected. Why? Because television only thought that it should cast black and Asian actors in race roles, and not because they can act or that they can produce or that they can direct mainstream general programming. So the Cultural Diversity Network really came out of, led from Carlton Television, which is a commercial channel, and it had both a moral reason for doing it and also, for me, a business reason. You cannot ignore the wealth that the Asian community and the Sikh community in particular contributes and generates to the GDP of this country. And it was the business case that one was making as well as a cultural case. Things did improve? Are things continuing to improve? I was at a launch of Meera Sayal's Asian Comedy Night at BBC Radio, and it was interesting hearing her say something, and she said it in a joking manner, which is, where is the ethnic representation or reflection in Downton Abbey, in some of the more popular television dramas that we're seeing, yeah? So I think, the issue still remains. The challenges of getting more and more Asians on screen, I don't think that challenge has been met completely.
And do you think that's because there's not enough people who are trying to get into this field, or do you think they're just blocked at certain levels, or they're pushed into a particular stereotype system? Welcome to my panel. So Paramjeet, let's start with you first. You have had an absolutely phenomenal career, and you've been involved in films such as Wuthering Heights, The Iron Lady, and Now Is Good, which I'm sure a lot of our audience have seen. And I just wanted to ask you, what got you started in media, and how did your career progress? Because it's quite an achievement to get where you are today.
Thank you. I mean, I would say I've had a very unconventional career, and why I moved into how I got into film and television is it was really a passion for telling stories. I was passionate about telling stories which reflected me both on television, in the radio, in print, and in cinema. I came here in the 60s. I came to England in 1965 as a 10-year-old, as an immigrant. And there was very little of our stories, our realities that was reflected. And that remains still a passion, that if you want to work in television, you have to have a passion. If you want to work in the media, and my passion was telling stories. There are those who've got passion to be technicians, editors, cinematographers, directors, writers. My passion was finding a way of telling stories.
So all the stories that you've told so far, which story stands out in your mind for you?
Gosh, many. I mean, I started my career as a researcher in the BBC, making small items from 10 minutes,